The world of New London thrives in a caste system of enforced social order, and prides itself in its perceived superiority over the barbaric nature of the inhabitants of the savage lands. When a scientist violates one of the Utopia's basic principles, she's forced to end a monogamous relationship. A high-ranking officer begins having doubts when an incident compels him to think for himself for the first time in his life. As New London goes about its ways, uprising stirs in the savage lands as an insurrection aimed at taking back the homeland brews. In the Utopia of New London, 3 rules uphold social order. Citizens are prohibited from having privacy, building a family, and practicing monogamy. Everyone belongs to everyone else, and everyone is happy, or at least that's what they want everyone to think. In a lab, scientist Lenina Crown observes an embryo under a microscope, which she identifies as a beta-. She pierces the cell and injects it with a bluish fluid. Over the intercom, Lenina is summoned to the higher offices. At first, she looks up and around, ignoring the voice, but when she's called again, she relents. As she makes her way out of the laboratory, she encounters similarly dressed people in white lab coats. Using the transport pod, Lenina travels across the advanced city of New London. She takes a pill called a soma, which regulates her emotions and calms her down. When she reaches the destination, the pod stops and she enters an office building. She then heads to Bernard Marx's office, an Alpha Plus responsible for assessing the citizenry's emotional trauma. Before starting the meeting, Bernard offers her a yellow soma, priming her to think that whatever he's about to discuss is quite serious. She declines the tablet since her levels are normal. Bernard discusses Lenina's exclusive physical relationship with Henry Foster, an Alpha Plus. Although she denies it, Bernard shows a hologram of all the intimate instances between her and Henry, which violates New London's tenets of anti-exclusivity. Uncomfortable, Lenina asks him to stop the projected images. Bernard dryly assures her there's no reason to be ashamed as his job acquaints him with this type of situation. While he understands her attraction to Henry's Alpha Plus physique, he doesn't understand the selfishness of monogamous private relationships that disregard the rest of the social body. Lenina tries defending herself, but Bernard stops her and bluntly comments on how she didn't think of anyone else but herself, knowing full well that everyone else has the same right and access to Henry. Beaten, Lenina resigns to the admonition, and as she sits silently, Bernard catches her staring at the somas. Sensing her distress, he offers her the yellow soma again, but Lenina asks for something stronger. Pleased, Bernard gives her an orange tablet and sarcastically remarks that Lenina can't be blamed for her actions being a beta plus. Henry, as the superior Alpha Plus, should have seen the bigger picture and considered those who desired Lenina. Lenina wonders if Henry told Bernard about them, but she waves off her question. He says it's a good thing they caught the relationship in time before it led to feelings of jealousy, possessiveness, and secrecy. Before she leaves, Bernard advises the woman to follow the recommended actions to feel better. Once outside, Lenina spots Henry talking to another woman. When their eyes meet, Henry bows timidly before walking away. In his office, Bernard replays the recording of Lenina and Henry's intimate moments. As the two hug, he watches perplexed at Lenina's somber expression. Lenina walks out into a courtyard and basks in the sunlight. She stops and places the orange soma in her mouth, which instantly lightens her mood. Meanwhile, Bernard spying on Lenina and Henry gets interrupted when the director calls him. He shuts his eyes, frustrated, but collects his poise before turning around and speaking to the hologram. The director informs him of an incident he'd like Bernard to look into. Back in the lab, Lenina's colleague and friend, Franny, wonders if she hooked up with Henry again because if so, she'll jokingly report her. All smiles, Lenina assures her ending is better than mending, despite being clearly hurt by the recent events. She focuses on her work and shuttles the embryo together with all others in the facility. The embryos are then stored in a network that lets them grow outside the womb. An advertisement on Indra, the computer network that connects New London's population, romanticizes the perfection of strict social hierarchy in the Utopia. Without it, New London would be embroiled in greed, superstition, and pain. The ad shows the Savage Lands, an amusement park in the Americas where savages perform realistic shows on the misery of the old world. When the ad ends, Bernard sits on a train as the Delta hands out refreshments. He watches him walk by with no intentions to interact. Bernard arrives at the recreational facility and is met by a Gamma, who looks troubled. Apparently, the incident the director asked them to handle involved an Epsilon having an accident. Though Bernard does his best to reassure him, the Gamma still appears confused and asks for his help to make sense of the situation. Inside, other Epsilons crowd over a motionless body on the floor. When Bernard orders them to move aside, one Epsilon codenamed C-Jack60 doesn't listen. Instead, he stands too close to Bernard until he's offered a soma. Moments later, Bernard rolls the Epsilon's body over and sees his disfigured face in a pool of blood. Sensing everyone's distress, Bernard dispenses soma to the crowd. Staring upwards, Bernard sees a platform several floors up where the Epsilon possibly fell from and directs the Gamma to clear the area. Inspecting the balcony, he looks down at the area below. To challenge a theory, Bernard picks a grapefruit from a nearby tree and drops it over the ledge, and the fruit smashes on impact. He returns to where the body is, and asks C-Jack-60 if he knows what happened, and the expressionless man claims the Epsilon simply fell. When C-Jack-60 leaves, Bernard inspects the body and touches the man's forehead. Feeling the Epsilon's emotions when he willingly jumped to his death startles Bernard and triggers a panic attack. Unfortunately, he's run out of soma to calm himself with after giving them all away to the crowd earlier. Later that day, Bernard visits his friend Helm, who works as an emotional engineer. He wonders if there's pain that soma can't relieve, but Helm doubts there is and dismisses the idea of Epsilons having feelings. Surprised by her statement, Bernard corrects her and says Epsilons feel just like those in the upper tiers of the social hierarchy do. Helm still dismisses Bernard's thoughts as she's convinced that the emotions he felt when he touched the Epsilon are just his own. When Bernard argues, Helm doesn't want to hear any more of his complaints and ramblings. To soothe her friend, she decides to give him her reservation at the pleasure garden that evening so he can make connections and be physically intimate with other people. Bernard doesn't care for the place, but Helm reminds him to enjoy the advantages granted to people of his position. Later in the train, Franny walks in glamorous clothing as Lenina takes a soma. Noticing an alpha woman observing her, Franny waves to test her appeal. Posing in front of Lenina, Franny asks for her opinion on several different outfits. When all her options elicit Lenina's laughter, Franny gives up and sits down frustrated. Lenina hands her a soma and tells Franny to just be herself, lightening her friend's mood. At the pleasure garden, Lenina spots Henry with his companion Damon. As she introduces Franny to her former secret lover and Henry introduces Damon to her, she puts on a smile and tries to hide her dismay. Henry takes Franny's hand and leads her to the dance floor, and Damon does the same with Lenina. The partygoers gather and sensually dance with each other on the dance floor. Across the room, Lenina spots Bernard and watches him refuse the couple's advances. When the man sees Lenina watching him, he freezes before hurriedly leaving. Though initially bothered by Henry with Franny, Lenina decides to try and enjoy herself as everyone around her moves from dancing erotically to making love. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, in the Savage Lands, John hoses down a limousine's windshield while listening to music. In the side view mirror, he sees Madison walk past dressed as a pregnant bride with a bloody dress. John excitedly runs toward her, but she's in a sour mood, struggling to get out of her costume. He helps her take off the fake belly until she's down to a yellow bikini. John stares at her figure before stammering about how he got worried last night when she didn't come over. Madison explains she had a group meeting last night. He feels bad that she didn't come by because he wanted to show her the view, implying a missed rendezvous. They chuckle at the idea, but she thinks continuing their secret romance is a bad idea since she's already with someone. The two continue flirting when Cavil, Madison's boyfriend, arrives, yelling at John. Madison tells John to run away while she tries to calm Cavil down, but the young man ignores her advice and stays. Cavil rants about how the show was a mess and he's furious at John's prop gun work. Cavil points the gun at him and fires blanks, asking the scared man why he can't be a professional. John calmly explains he needs to check the firing pin first, but Cavil shoves him to the ground and demands he do his job properly. If the shows don't do well, the tourists will stop coming and they won't make a living. Before his group leaves, Cavil throws the gun at John's head, injuring him. In his warehouse, John checks and polishes the prop weapon. As he aims the gun to test it, blood oozes from his forehead. When he leaves, he makes eye contact with a tall man who starts walking in his direction. Intimidated, John hurriedly bails and heads to a shop. In the shop, a customer haggles with the owner while John fiddles with different CDs in hopes of finding new music. At first, he thinks the selection is rubbish, but eventually finds something he likes. He brings it to the owner, who hands him something inside a paper bag to give to his mother. John tells the older man to leave his mother alone, but the man says he can't do that. The owner then gives John a copy of an album by an unknown singer, which the young man appreciates. When John gets home, he's frustrated that his mom Linda has once again spent her entire day sitting by the window wearing a skimpy dress. John asks his mother if she went outside at all today. Linda makes excuses for her agoraphobic behavior, so John gives her the silent treatment. When she asks what's wrong, John says her sitting by the window dressed that way is the problem. He pleads with her to put something else on. That night, while having a candlelit dinner, John asks her to go easy on the liquor the shop owner gave, so it'll last longer this time. He enjoys the dinner she cooked, but his mood quickly dampens when she mentions how much he resembles his father in a certain light. John tells her to stop talking about his father just as the power turns back on. John feels bad for raising his voice at her, so he turns the power off and pours more liquor into her glass. Later that night, after he tucks her into bed, a noise by the bedroom window catches John's attention. He checks warily by the corridor and sees a shadow running outside their house. He pulls a knife from their kitchen drawer and makes his way outside. Suddenly, bright car lights blind him and Madison greets him before several men grab John and place a sack over his head. Later, with John on his knees and his hands bound, the sack is removed and a woman named Sheila looms over him. His request to be untied falls on deaf ears as the woman orders him to follow her. They stop next to a hole in the ground, causing John to panic, but Sheila shushes him and redirects his gaze to the Savage Lands sign. She calls it an obscenity and hates how the New Worlders have taken their land and made them prisoners for their amusement. From the hole, Madison emerges and John hopes she can clear things up and explain that they've got the wrong person. Sheila reveals he really is the person they're after and recounts watching John wash cars every day, helping put on shows for the outsiders. She points at the blue perimeter fence that burns them to ashes with one touch, while the people of the New World pass through unscathed, making Sheila wonder if they're even human. As John stares at the dark hole, Sheila tells him his destiny is inside it. The men pick John up despite his resistance and pull him closer to the pit. The woman says what's down there will give John the chance to live or die by his own wits and will. Light floods the hole and John sees that inside are wooden cases filled with bullets. Sheila vows they'll tear oppression down and reclaim what's theirs. John asks what they want him to do, but she redirects his question and challenges him to determine whether he's really free or if his purpose is merely to wash cars. Back in New London, C-Jack-60 lies awake in his quarters, unable to sleep. He leaves his room and visits the room of the deceased Epsilon worker, C-Jack-57. Meanwhile, Bernard walks into his room and stares at the mirror. After the party at the pleasure garden, Lenina pauses by a tree, dejectedly watching Henry and Franny in an embrace. Concurrently, C-Jack-60 picks up a piece of metal under C-Jack-57's mattress as tears roll down his cheek. In the bathroom, Bernard leans closer to his reflection and removes his special contact lens with thin wires attached that embed into his eyeballs. He leaves it atop a glass before sitting on the toilet. Seconds later, the tiny device glows and beeps, but he doesn't notice. When the lens beeps a second time, he sees it glowing and hurriedly places it back on his eye. After Bernard answers the call, the director demands to know why he was offline. He then brings up Bernard's recent activity, about how he's more private, preferring to be alone and not partaking in any recent physically intimate connections or communal activities. Bernard argues he had no free time, but the director finds it unacceptable and calls his recent behavior solipsism. He reminds Bernard he's an Alpha Plus who doesn't need to be told of the harm privacy can cause to the social body. The director shows Bernard the smashed grapefruit at the site of the accident and wonders why he dropped it. He reiterates that Bernard's job is to assess emotional trauma, provide Sama if necessary, and not to understand the Epsilon's motivations, who he believes simply fell to his death. Finding his actions unsatisfactory, the director recommends sending him away for a vacation to the Savage Lands for recovery. At the Savage Lands, Madison drives John home and tells him to think about the opportunity he's been given. When she feels his hesitation to participate in the group's plan, Madison subtly threatens Linda's life by handing him a single bullet. Later that night, Bernard hurries downstairs as Lenina barges through the front door, complaining about how she doesn't feel any better even after following his advice. She calls him a coward and a hypocrite for standing alone and leaving the party earlier. To her surprise, Bernard admits following his own advice doesn't make him feel better either. Bernard shares seats in hot water with his boss for private behaviors and going offline. Although he tries to meet what's expected of him and that he doesn't have any problems with communal lovemaking, he's recently begun to think nothing is real, and that he's not who he's supposed to be. Lenina looks at him sympathetically and offers her help by uploading to Indra a simulation of the two of them making love. Bernard wonders if the simulation can fool Indra, and Lenina just chuckles because she's always wanted to try if it could. Lenina opens up and says Bernard was wrong for saying she was only attracted to Henry because he was an Alpha Plus. It was her curious disposition as a scientist, always wanting to look inside. Henry let her peer inside him, and getting to know him beyond what's superficial is why she enjoyed his company. Bernard asks what she sees inside him, but Lenina falls silent as she gazes out the window at a rocket launch in the distance. In the Savage Lands, John sits on the roof listening to music and drinking booze. He holds the bullet in his hand as rockets flying overhead illuminate the night sky.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.